game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One2One.
On to my next question. Thinking about you, sir, as an inspiration, as the Director General of the NIIA, and thinking about many who would want or who might have wanted a career in the diplomatic service. I remember, actually, it was once upon a time a particular passion of mine. I was convinced I was going to go into the foreign service, and I can imagine that there were many young people who, in those days, had that desire. But things appear to be changing. It appears that perhaps a career in the diplomatic service may not be quite as appealing as it once was, or certainly hasn't been as popular people to get into. Is this because of the way things are changing in our country, or what would you say about that?
Well, I mean, you see, what hasn't changed in our country? The lenses that we had that long ago are no longer the same lenses. I mean, take the teaching profession, for instance, which used to be quite attractive. People didn't go into teaching because they expected that in teaching they would become very rich people. There was, a noble cause, calling, for teaching. People went into the police force, into the army, into those places, not because they expected they were going to become, very wealthy. For many of them, it was, the national cause, the call to duty, which was a good thing, and so on. So the diplomatic service was always the most elitist, of all the services. It was not an all-comers vocation. It was something that, we carefully selected people into. The requirements, the qualifications were some of the highest, at the time. It's always been so. And that's universal, that's global, that's what everyone does. So it's not always had the outlook of what you might call a populist, sector. So it's still there. And some of the greatest diplomats that the world has ever known have come from Nigeria. I mean, from the days of Sip Adebo to the days of Ibrahim Gambari, to the days of Amina Mohammed, who is there today, in the AU, in the UN, and our ambassadors have been great people. So that's one area where Nigeria has done very well. But, as you know, I said to you before we came on this program, even now, it's never too late. You're a medical doctor. We would be glad to have you as an ambassador. Why not? It's something that we have always taken very seriously. And we recognize that when you have great diplomats for it, it makes the country even greater.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to that point, we're really talking about those the way in which one would select or invite people into the foreign service or the diplomatic service. I'm reminded, however, that in today's changing world, and you're absolutely right, it's a very elite profession, so to speak. But in today's changing world, just thinking about soft power, some of the most influential people in this country today, and some of our greatest ambassadors are actually sportsmen, women, entertainers, and people in the world of fashion. Is there something to be said for co-opting these sorts of individuals, creating a framework for them to do what they do best on behalf of the country?
The point that you just made about soft power diplomacy is something that for us at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, we have acknowledged. Actually, we now have a unit, uh, we have a desk that deals with sports diplomacy. It is headed by Ambassador Segun Odegbami, mathematical. And, he has raised the status of sports diplomacy, in unimaginable ways. Now, he talks about soft power diplomacy using sports, but he also says it's a major revenue earner today. Now, we talk of funds from diaspora communities and so on, but the money in sports, it's huge. And, because of the large number of Nigerians who are involved in that, it's a gold mine that we can use. But, if you take Akeem Olajuwon was a pioneer in the NBA for basketball.
Houston Rockets.
Now, he is one of the closest people to the Bush family in Texas. So what greater leverage would anybody, desire, than having a Hakeem Olajuwon, on your side? That's soft power. Now, if you go around the UK or you go to Saudi Arabia, the director of the international recruitment of footballers, the revolutionary era in Saudi Arabia, is a Nigerian. Now, all over the world, in American football and everywhere, we have all of those people. Now, you're saying, how do we harness this? We have a diaspora commission, that has been working very hard, to see how we can optimize the strategic deployments and uses, of these kinds of things. And I can tell you that many of these people have opened doors where it has been necessary to do to unbelievable levels. So even in the absence of a very coherent framework for dealing with, for engaging, our sportsmen and women, they've been put to great use. Now, take the artists, the creative artists, or Nollywood itself. I mean, I don't know how many times you've been in shops around the world, and the music everyone is playing is Nigerian music.
Absolutely.
I mean, and this is, music is universal. The language is so neutral. They don't need to speak the language. Everywhere, including countries where English is not spoken, they know all our musicians, the great people. They invite them. The Indian the other day who was having the biggest wedding ceremony ever in history. Nigerians. They see the World Cup, competitions. There are Nigerian artists. It tells you what clout we have, and this clout is not isolated. It's not unfounded. It's not unknown. The world has always recognized the creative genius of Nigerians everywhere. I mean, one of the things that the world has come to know about Nigeria is the fact that, all the Shoinka, the Achebe, the Chimamanda, all of these great creative artists, they've come from Nigeria. If you take the Booker writing competition, the literature prizes and so on, it's almost become a Nigerian monopoly. So the world recognizes that all over the world. I mean, the other day I was going through a directory, of researchers in specialized fields, even in the sciences, and Nigerians featured. And so there's a great deal, and that's why the world has not, come so fully against Nigeria on account of the mishaps that have come through, the bad image that the country has had in the last few decades, over internet fraud, and those kinds of things, because they know that those are not the hallmarks of the true Nigerians. The true Nigerians are entrepreneurial, they're industrious, they are hardworking people. They are the best at everything that they do, and that's obvious. Absolutely. I mean, just think of the number of Nigerians that play in the different English leagues. Just think of the number of Nigerians. And by the way, we have also used our soft power diplomacy in a manner that many people don't also recognize. But here, let me be also historically accurate. That when we talked about the technical aid corps, it was something that was recommended to government by the Professor Bolaji Akinyemi when he was DG of the NIIA. And we've used it. I mean, so if you go across Africa, you would find that many of the science teachers in countries like Rwanda and Burundi and Uganda and so on, mathematics teachers and so on, Nigerians. There are Nigerian pharmacists. So everywhere, the technical aid corps has been spot on, for Nigeria. And these are the kinds of things that countries appreciate and acknowledge when they say that Nigeria is a clear African leader. And don't forget, that until today, we support countries, for elections and so on. We do things that a big African power, should do.
Should be doing. It's been an amazingly insightful conversation, but we're not done yet. I would like very briefly to return to your time at the Igbinedion University. Of course, 14 years as Vice Chancellor. You brought to the role a wealth of experience from a variety of sectors, but mainly academia, of course. That was, Igbinedion University remains the first privately funded university in Nigeria. Am I correct? How did you find at the time that it compared with the University of Ibadan and Lagos, and what did you feel you had to do to bring up the standard, if that's the right context? And what would you consider your greatest achievement as VC?
It's easier to answer that last question. I'm not going to be able to talk about my achievements at all, as I would not talk about my greatest achievement, but people who know the university and take it, in historical perspective, can pass those judgments. I did everything that I had to do to grow the university to a formidable global university standard. That's what I would say there.
But I think you answered the question already. You said people, and the university system is about building people.
Yes,
And you talked about growing it into becoming a formidable university.
But let me say, that I was in the saddle between 2004 and 2018. It's incredible how things change so fast. Today, there are probably 100 private universities and more in Nigeria. I imagine, if I was vice chancellor at this time, what would I be doing or thinking? Yeah, because, when I was vice chancellor in 2004, we were only two private universities with medicine. Only two. And even that long ago, thank God you're a medical practitioner. It was difficult to find consultants and specialists in several of the fields and subfields. In chemical pathology, for instance, you could count only a handful, of the guys. And yet, from the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria's perspective and from the NUC's perspective, you needed to have professors, you needed to have, and we were competing with the more established universities for the very few people. Now, I imagine that, today there are over 60 private universities with medicine. Where would they get the people from? Now, so one of the things that, we did, very early was to set up a staff development program. And that helped. Many of the guys, that entered our staff development program, would come in when they become specialists and so on, they would run away. But, we at least had that foundation. Now, but I think the greatest impetus for many of the things that I personally would look back and say we did was the proprietor of the university, Chief Ep9 himself, who, when I became vice chancellor, would ask me, do you think this university is lower than the University of Ibadan? I said, no. He says, why? I said, because a university is a university. And, that actually was a strong motivation for him, to say that, these other universities are not better than us. I said, no, sir. As a matter of fact, and I did this out of conviction. I said to him, the future of the university sector in Nigeria lies in the private universities. There's no way the public universities are going to be able to compete with the private universities in the long run. And that's already beginning to happen. I mean, see, the other day, we had COVID. There's Professor Happy, who is a Redeemers University. All of those things that, became African scientific and medical contributions to the narratives on COVID came from Redeemers and the laboratory that you have there.
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's a private university. So private universities have excelled. I mean, at Ep9 we were the first university in Nigeria to produce medical doctors, from the private sector. And we had doctors everywhere. In fact, it's the strongest program that we had in the university. Don't forget that, Ep9 already had a specialist, hospital that was state of the art before, the university was established. So I would say that, one of the things that I thought helped us in the university was coming from my comparative politics background. I didn't want to be a copycat, because people would say to me, the way it's done in UNN or in Ibadan or in Benin and so on. So I said, no, I want people from those universities to say, we want to do what they are doing in Ep9. So this was my driver all the time. I never want to emulate or imitate, what my children call, don't be a copycat. No, I can't be a copycat. So Ep9 was never a copycat. And you find that in the moniker, for us was Ep9 University, authentic. So we were authentic, in every material particular. But I think that, the challenges were enormous. First was that we had a perception that was very common that private universities were inferior. And there were places where the kinds of things that should not go on in a normal university could happen. So, for instance, there were people who applied to me to be employed as lecturers, and they had HND. So, and I said to the guys, but you're applying to me, you have HND. HND is a very good qualification, but it is not a qualification for lecturing in a university. And they will say to me, oh, we thought it is different in private universities. Now, so that was a perception thing. But quite early, I could see that because the private university was the future of the university sector in the country, I thought if we didn't have the necessary interventions, the private universities would become a way of extending the gulf between the rich and the poor. So I had gone to a foundation to say support my work at the university. And they say, no, that would be a contradiction in terms. I say, why? They say, because they are poor. And a private university, by definition, is not just elitist, it's poor-rich. So I said, fine. So they give me a clue to what I thought, would, bring these things together. So I said, if the poor cannot be in the private university, then it remains the exclusive preserve of the rich. It means that if the private universities then become the future, as they already have become, then the poor would never have any position. So I wrote to all of the state governments in Nigeria. And I said to them, here's the point. The national elite is going to come from graduates of the private universities. And if you guys don't support people, ordinary poor people from your states, you would exclude them, from that elite, from the national elite of the future. And I'm telling you, many of those progressive governors embraced this and brought their students to us. When the amnesty program, came on board, and the guys were saying, we need to ensure that these people get education and so on. And people were, so I went to Amnesty International. I said, give me the students. Give me these militants. I will transform them. So there were very bold steps that we took as a university. They paid off, thank God. But we had the great motivation was to say, we are better, no, not better. We are not just as well, not just as good as the more established universities. They should come to emulate us. And I think that many private universities, and they are grateful to us as the Nigerian University. Today, the 100 and more private universities never forget to say, thank you for showing us the way. So they're all there today. And the people are confident they can send their children to those schools because, Nigerian University was successful.
Absolutely. Certainly a trailblazer. You are, Prof. But I have one final question on a lighter note, hopefully. About 2 years ago, maybe 1.5 to 2 years ago, you I don't think you convened the conference, but you were certainly given the responsibility of introducing a certain Boris Johnson at a conference. But I wasn't. I missed that opportunity. Sadly, I wasn't
to hear about this.
I wasn't there. But I've always been quite fascinated by Boris. Interesting character. But I'm wondering, actually, trying to get into your head, what you were thinking at that point in time. Introducing that gentleman, knowing where he was at the time in his own political trajectory, thinking about where we are in this country. What exactly were you thinking at that point?
Now, perhaps I should preface this by saying the Boris Johnson that came for the Ayamosigwe distinguished lecture where I was a reborn Boris Johnson. Yeah. And the theme, of that meeting guided, his new views. Because the point was, should we have a state that, shies away from its core responsibility for development? And his point was no. The state must be pivotal to the development process. I mean, if you're going to build infrastructure, you're going to have the social infrastructure, you're going to have schools, you're going to have hospitals, you're going to have education. The state must drive it. And, that was a different Boris Johnson.
It's not a very conservative.
No, so he came to Nigeria after, post-Johnson as a new Johnson. At least it was a fleeting moment. He had to adapt to the kinds of things that were being discussed at that occasion. But he was very strong on the point of the pivotal roles of the state in the development process. And, I believe that we have gone beyond the era where the state was expected to undertake everything, including providing employment. But the state must provide the enabling environments, for everything and provide that enabling environment has a strong regulatory framework. Because you see, today people say if you don't commodify the things that you have, including intellectual property, you cannot, grow wealth. So we agree. But wealth growing is not gambling. It's not banditry. It's not criminality. Wealth growing in a good society is one that is governed by rules. If you have title deeds, you have, those kinds of things. And, it's not the rule of the thumb. It's not every person, his own judge, her own judge. It's the rule of law. So if the rule of law is something that the state is able to guarantee, that is all fair and that you get justice if there is an infraction or if you are unjustly treated, your property is taken away, and so on. That's how to grow. So the enabling environment is not only in the construction of bridges and good roads, so that's fine, but it's also in the strengthening of the regulatory environment, the judiciary. Must be strengthened. The medicine, for instance, you cannot practice medicine, outside of a strong regulatory framework. Otherwise, every person will kill every person else, as say they are doctors. So those kinds of regulations must be strictly enforced. Yes, that's part of what Boris Johnson was saying.
Of course, yeah, an essential role of the state to actually provide a policy and regulatory framework. But perhaps not quite as radical for even for Boris. Simply accepting that that's the state and that is the reality. But while we're on the subject of statesmen or statesmanship, we've just talked about Boris. You mentioned Henry Kissinger earlier in this conversation. You've mentioned people like Professor Bola Akemi. If I were to ask you to name one person who you believe has been absolutely pivotal to the trajectory and the development of our foreign diplomacy in this country, who would that be?
Very interesting. Because this was very foundational. And because these were not things that you expected to find at the time, in other words, exceptionalities, peculiarities, would be Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Because, in their time, he didn't have the kind of privileged education that Nnamdi Azikiwe had. He didn't go to school the way Obafemi Awolowo did. He was not like Herbert Macaulay. He was a teacher, and he had only gone for a certificate course in the United Kingdom in London for a few months and so on. But he had an amazing understanding of the global environment. And, he immersed himself within it. And like I say, he was first foreign minister, Senate Affairs minister, and he did exceptionally well. And he had quite a courage, a dignified courage. He was spoke Queen's English at the time. He spoke real good. Was a broadcaster, well, own and very happy. Very happy. That's the word. And he was a great guy. I think, because he was one of the founding fathers of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, that he didn't work alone, but that team was fantastic. But the one that gave intellectual drive, and took us to the place where the Kissingers would have said, come on, wait a minute, what's coming out of Nigeria? Give it to Bolaji Akinyemi and Ibrahim Gambari.
And on that note, Professor Eghosa Osaghae, it has been an immense pleasure, a most informative conversation I've had with you today. It has been a privilege to talk to you in One2One. Thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.